Maybe you're just too stubborn to listen to God. Hey everybody, this is Pastor Justin Walker with The Whole Truth, where I'm on a mission to get as many people into God's Word as possible because I know that God's Word has the answers for our life. And we are in Exodus chapter 5. We're picking up in verse 3. Moses went to Pharaoh like God told him to. He's 80 years old, an old man, used to live in the palace 40 years ago, went into Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go. Let them go worship in the wilderness. This is what God is telling you, Pharaoh." And Pharaoh had that very important question. Who is God? I don't know anything about God. He said, who is God? And so we pick up after Pharaoh has just said, who is God? Read this with me. Exodus chapter 5, verse 3. So they said, "The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go 3 days' journey into the desert and sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with sword." Now, that is not exactly the way that that's going to go. They say, let us go into the wilderness so that our God doesn't fall on us. But really what it should have been is let us go in the wilderness so that our God doesn't fall on you. But here we go, verse 4. Then the king of Egypt, that's the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt said to them, "Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people from their work? Get back to your labor." And Pharaoh said, "Look, the people of the land are many now, and you make them rest from their labor." So the same day Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and commanded officers, saying, "You shall no longer give the people straw to make brick as before. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. And you shall lay on them the quota of bricks which they made before. You shall not reduce it, for they are idle. Therefore they cry out, saying, 'Let us go sacrifice to our God.' Let more work be laid on the men, that they may labor in it, and let them not regard false words." And the taskmasters of the people and their officers went out and spoke to the people, saying, "Thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you straw. Go get yourself straw where you can find it, yet none of your work will be reduced." So the people were scattered abroad through all the land of Egypt to gather stubble instead of straw. And the taskmasters forced them to hurry, saying, "Fulfill your work, your daily quota, as when there was straw." Also the officers of the children of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters set over them, were beaten and asked, "Why have you not fulfilled your task in making brick, both yesterday and today as before?" All right, we made it up through verse 14. I'm going to read the rest of it here in just a second. But do you understand what happened? Pharaoh said, "I don't know God. Who is this God?" Then he jumps on Moses and Aaron and says, "Why are you two making the people stop their work? What are you all doing? These people need to get back to work. They need to get back to making their bricks. There's lots of people and none of them are working because of what you two have done." So then he pulls out this. He says, "You tell the people," tells the taskmasters and the officers. That's the slave drivers. And then there's these representatives of the slaves. Now, they're not representatives like they represent the slaves in a good way, like they get to go and say, "Hey, it's not a union," okay? These are guys that basically, they are Jewish people, Hebrew people, who are forced to translate the law and make sure that everybody who is enslaved knows what their task is. They're over top of other slaves. They're officers, but they got beat by the taskmasters as well. They're just being forced to force the people. I hope that makes sense the way that I said that. It seemed a little confusing as it came out, but I think you get the idea. And so these officers, these kind of representatives, they're telling the people, that the taskmasters tell the officers, "Go tell the people that they're going to continue to make the same amount of bricks, but we're not giving them any straw. No straw. Make the bricks. Get your own straw. Why should we get your straw? You get your own straw. No, we're not going to lower the amount of bricks. This is the amount of bricks that's needed to be built, and you guys have plenty of people. Tell your kids to do it. Tell your wives to go do it. Go get your own straw." And so they're hurrying the people. The people can't even get enough straw, so they're having to get stubble. I mean, where are slave people going to get straw from? And do you see what the Pharaoh just did? He got mad at them for not making bricks, but then he turned around and said, "Make the bricks without straw." Now the bricks aren't going to be made as well, and they're certainly not going to be made as fast. What's Pharaoh really doing? He's saying, "I refuse. I refuse, God. Go ahead, send your prophets to me." Maybe he doesn't believe in God, He said he didn't. He said he's never met with this God he doesn't know anything about. And so his point is to prove not only is there not a God, you all sent your prophets to me, and now I'm going to make things even harder for you. Well, look, it doesn't get prettier. It gets uglier. It's verse 15. Then the officers of the children of Israel came and cried out to Pharaoh, saying, why are you dealing thus with your servants? There is no straw given to your servants. And they say to us, make brick, and indeed your servants are beaten, and the fault is in your own people. But he said, you are idle, idle. Therefore you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Therefore go now and work, for no straw shall be given you, yet you shall deliver the quota of bricks. And the officers of the children of Israel saw that they were in trouble after it, and said, you shall not reduce any bricks from your daily quota. Then as they came out from Pharaoh, they met Moses and Aaron, who stood there to meet them. And they said, let the Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us abhorrent in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, to put a sword in their hand to kill us. So Moses returned to the Lord and said, Lord, why have you brought trouble on this people? Why is it you have sent me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to this people. Neither have you delivered your people at all. Now, I want to touch on this very last thing for just a moment, and then I'm going to come back to that opening statement that maybe you're just too stubborn to listen to the Lord. But notice what happens at the end. The people come to Moses. The Pharaoh won't relent when the officers say, this is your fault. They can't make the bricks because there's not enough straw. And Pharaoh says, you're idle. A bunch of idle people. Now, they're not really idle, are they? They're slave people being forced to work, forced to labor. So they're not a lazy people, they're not an idle people, but that's what Pharaoh is accusing them of. He's saying that they're idle, and that's the reason he's telling them to get their own straw, and they realize they are in trouble. So they meet with Moses and Aaron, and they get on them and say, let the Lord judge you for what you've done. Things got worse. So Moses goes to the Lord and says, you didn't deliver us at all. I want to touch on that for just a minute, because God actually told Moses that this is the way it was going to go. Moses is being strengthened here and learning some faith in this as well. God did tell Moses that it was going to be this way. And right now, we are still dealing with pandemic, and we're still dealing with riots and civil unrest in our own country. Right here in 2020, it's July in 2020 right now, and we're still dealing with a whole lot of stuff right now. And I want to remind you that God actually told us it would be this way for us too, didn't he? He said that in the last days there are going to be perilous times. There's going to be wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes and in various places and all kinds of trouble. And he said, be forewarned, this is the beginning of birth pain. This is the beginning. Friends, I'm certain we're in the last days, but I'm also certain that it's going to get a whole lot worse. If you think it's bad right now, when the church is taken out and raptured, it's going to be bad. Now, that's a little parenthetical note for you. Let's come back to the topic of today, which is Pharaoh being idle, saying, who is the Lord? And then he goes on to be so stubborn as to make the people's work harder. What he's proving is, I stand against God. And I want to tell you something. That is the same thing that happens with people today, and maybe even with you. I'll tell you a quick story. A young man sat in my office, and he told me that he was struggling with atheism, that he really believed atheism more than God. And I tried to talk with him and reason with him as best as I could. And he kept putting these weird arguments out that really didn't make a whole lot of sense. And here's one of them. He said to me, he said, if God is so real, I don't understand. Why doesn't God just reveal himself? Why doesn't he just show up and go, here I am, and say, look, here I am. I am God. I am real. And I told him, I remembered sitting there kind of stunned for just a moment that such an opportunity was in front of me. And I sat silent for a moment, and I said, didn't he already do that? Didn't God already show up? For all of you who would say, why doesn't God just tell us? Didn't he? Well, why doesn't God just show up? Didn't he? Why doesn't God speak to us? Didn't he? You know, Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, in the New Testament, chapter 1 and verse 1 says, God, who in diverse manners spoke in times past, at sundry times and in diverse manners spoke in times past through the prophets, but has in these last days spoken to us through his Son, Jesus. Friends, God has been speaking. I want you to really stop and think about the the evidence that is for. Let's just use God's word for just a moment. Look at the evidence for God's word. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of copies. I mean, at this point, we're talking like over 5,000 of just one of copies that are of the manuscripts of the Bible. And they're all in line with each other. I mean, they're all pretty spot on, one compared to another, as far as the copies are concerned. How could you ever question God's word? No one ever questions Homer's The Odyssey. Do they? How many copies do we have of that? I didn't look it up, but I think it's like 7. I mean, how many copies do we have? Nobody questions work from Plato or Aristotle when we read anything from his work. We don't question any of theirs. Now, we don't have, some of those we may not even have any original copies, but nobody looks at that and says, oh, well, that's not from Plato, or oh, that's not from Homer, or those people didn't know. We don't have a problem accepting theirs. Why do we have a problem accepting the Bible? There's plenty of evidence for the Bible. As a matter of fact, in the book of Romans, God even says, even the heathen is without excuse, because creation cries out the glory of God, declares the glory of God. Even somebody who doesn't believe can look at the creation, look at the sky, look at the stars, and look at the trees and say, somebody created this. There must be a creator. Friends, if you want evidence of God, it's all around you. Maybe the problem isn't the evidence that God has given you, or that God hasn't revealed himself, or that God hasn't showed up, or that God hasn't told us. Maybe the problem is you're being too stubborn to listen when God does show up. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you tomorrow with more of Exodus chapter 6 tomorrow. See you then.